The scream cut through the pack hall before Mira even understood what was happening. "Liar, you disgusting liar." Lila's voice rang off the wooden beams, sharp and shaking with fury. Every head in the crowded hall turned. Mira, who had been kneeling beside an injured young wolf, quietly wrapping a bandage around his leg, froze with her hands still in the air. "Me?" Mira said, blinking. "What did I do?" Lila stormed across the hall, her golden hair swinging, her eyes wild. She stopped only a few feet away, close enough that Mira could feel the heat of her anger. "Don't play innocent," Lila spat. "I saw you. I saw the way you look at him. I saw you slip into his study last night." Mira's heart dropped into her stomach. "I went to bring him medicine for his shoulder. He was injured during the border patrol. That's all it was." "That's all it ever is with you, isn't it?" Lila's laugh was bitter, cruel. "Always some excuse. Always some reason to be near my mate." The word landed like a slap. Mira flinched. "Your mate?" she repeated slowly. "Since when do you and Alpha Cade share a bond?" A murmur rippled through the hall. Wolves who had been eating, talking, laughing, only moments before, now leaned forward, hungry for the drama unfolding in front of them. Mira felt dozens of eyes pressing on her skin like small stones. Lila's chin lifted, proud and certain. "Since 3 months ago, we bonded during the summer moon. I felt it the moment his eyes met mine. A pull, a warmth, everything the old stories describe." Mira opened her mouth, then closed it again. She had heard nothing of this. No announcement had been made. No ceremony held. In a pack like theirs, a true mate bond between the alpha and anyone was never kept secret for long. It was cause for celebration, for feasting, for the entire pack to gather and bear witness. "If that's true," Mira said carefully, "why has there been no announcement? Why has Alpha Cade said nothing?" Lila's eyes narrowed to slits. "Because people like you keep interfering, sneaking around him, making him doubt what he already knows in his heart." "I have never interfered with anything," Mira said, her voice steady despite the tremor building in her chest. "I am the pack healer. I tend to wounds. That is my duty." "Your duty," Lila sneered, "or your excuse." Before Mira could answer, the heavy wooden doors at the far end of the hall groaned open. Alpha Cade stepped through, his broad shoulders still wrapped in a light bandage beneath his shirt, his dark eyes sweeping across the room and landing, almost immediately, on Mira. Something passed through her chest at that look, a strange, electric warmth that had nothing to do with the argument unfolding around her. She had felt it before, small flickers of it, whenever he was near. She had always told herself it was nothing, respect for her alpha, nothing more. "What is going on here?" Cade's voice was low, but it carried across the hall with the natural authority of a born leader. The murmuring crowd fell silent instantly. Lila spun to face him, her expression shifting in an instant from fury to wounded sorrow, tears welling in her eyes, as though summoned on command. "Cade," she said, her voice trembling now, soft and broken. "I caught her again. Sneaking around you, trying to come between us." Cade's brow furrowed. He looked between the two women, confusion flickering across his face. "Between us?" "Our bond," Lila said, stepping toward him and placing a hand gently on his arm. "I know you feel it too. I know sometimes it's hard to speak of these things in front of the pack, but we don't have to hide anymore. Not from her." Mira watched Cade's expression carefully. She expected him to nod, to confirm what Lila was saying, to defend the bond she claimed they shared. Instead, his eyes clouded with something like confusion, a flicker of doubt crossing his sharp features before he masked it. "Lila," he said slowly, "we have discussed this before. I care for you. I have known you since we were children, but I have never said the word mate." The hall went utterly silent. Even the crackling fire in the great hearth seemed to hush. Lila's face crumpled, but only for a heartbeat before her expression hardened again, turning sharply back toward Mira, as though she alone were responsible for the awkward silence stretching across the room. "She has confused you," Lila said. "She has been working some kind of trick on you. Herbs, maybe. She is the healer after all. Who knows what she puts into your tea, into your bandages." A ripple of unease spread through the gathered wolves. Mira felt the shift in the room instantly. the way suspicion, once planted, could spread through a crowd faster than fire through dry grass. A few pack members who had once smiled warmly at her now regarded her with narrowed, uncertain eyes. "That is not true," Mira said, her voice rising, despite her effort to remain calm. "I have never done anything but heal the sick and injured in this pack. I have no interest in manipulating anyone." "Then explain," Lila demanded, whirling back to face her. "Why every time I try to be close to Cade, you appear. Why he looks for you before council meetings. Why his eyes follow you across every room." Mira's cheeks burned, not from guilt, but from the sudden, uncomfortable awareness that Lila's words, however twisted in intent, carried a small thread of truth. She had noticed those things too. She had simply never allowed herself to consider what they might mean. Cade cleared his throat, stepping between the two women, his presence immediately commanding the attention of the hall once more. "That is enough," he said firmly. "Lila, I understand you are upset, but these accusations are serious. You cannot simply declare a bond that does not exist and use it to condemn another member of this pack." Lila's lips parted as though to argue, but something in Cade's tone silenced her. Instead, her eyes filled with fresh tears, and she pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "I am not lying," she whispered. "I feel it every day. The pull, the warmth. Ask anyone who has ever bonded. They will tell you it is real." Cade's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing, simply staring at Lila with an expression Mira could not quite read. Doubt, confusion, something deeper, buried beneath layers of loyalty and old affection. "We will discuss this privately," he said finally. "Not here, not in front of the entire pack." "But she," Lila started, gesturing toward Mira. "Has done nothing wrong that I have seen," Cade interrupted, his voice firm enough to end the conversation. He turned to the crowd, his gaze sweeping across the hall. "This gathering is over. Return to your evening." Slowly, reluctantly, the wolves began to disperse, though their whispered conversations followed Mira like a cloud of biting insects, as she gathered her healing supplies with shaking hands. She could feel their eyes on her back, hear the murmured speculation, even as she tried to focus on packing away bandages and small glass jars of herbs. "Mira?" She turned to find Cade standing behind her, Lila nowhere in sight, though Mira suspected she had not gone far. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, stripped of the authority he had used to command the hall. "I am fine," Mira said, though her hands were still trembling slightly as she closed her medical bag. "I don't understand what just happened." Cade rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she had seen him make before, usually when something troubled him deeply. "Neither do I, honestly. Lila has spoken of a bond before, in private, but I have never felt what she describes. I assumed she was simply mistaken, caught up in old feelings from our childhood." "She seemed very certain," Mira said carefully. "She did." Cade's dark eyes lingered on her face, searching for something. "I am sorry you were dragged into the middle of it. You have done nothing to deserve this." Mira offered a small, tired smile. "It's not your fault, though I would appreciate it if the entire pack did not now believe I am some kind of scheming healer plotting to steal their alpha." A ghost of a smile crossed Cade's lips, the first hint of warmth since he had entered the hall. "I will make sure they understand the truth." "Thank you," Mira said, gathering the last of her supplies. As she moved to leave, a strange, unfamiliar sensation rippled beneath her skin, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire still burning in the hearth. She paused, frowning slightly, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. "Is something wrong?" Cade asked, noticing her sudden stillness. "No," Mira said quickly, shaking off the odd feeling. "Just tired. It has been a long day." But as she walked home through the quiet forest paths that evening, the moon rising pale and full above the treetops, the strange warmth did not fade. If anything, it grew stronger, pulsing gently in her chest with every step she took away from the pack hall, away from Cade. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself it was simply stress, exhaustion, the shock of being accused so publicly and so unfairly. But deep within her, in a place she rarely allowed herself to listen to, something ancient and instinctive stirred awake. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. something that recognized a truth Mira herself did not yet understand. Far behind her, standing alone in the empty hall, Cade remained still for a long while after she had gone, staring at the door through which she had disappeared. He pressed a hand absently to his chest, frowning at the strange, unfamiliar warmth blooming there, a warmth he could not explain and had never felt with Lila, no matter how many times she insisted their bond was real. He did not yet understand what it meant either. But somewhere deep inside him, something had already begun to answer a call he had not consciously made. The night grew quiet around the packlands, the moon climbing higher, silver light spilling across the rooftops, and the dense trees beyond. Yet beneath that peaceful surface, the seeds of something far larger than a simple accusation had already been planted. A lie was taking root, a truth was beginning to stir, and neither Mira nor Cade yet understood how deeply their fates had already become entangled, pulled toward each other by a force neither of them had chosen, but that neither of them would ever be able to deny. For now, the pack whispered and speculated, unaware of the storm quietly gathering on the horizon. Lila watched from the shadows outside the hall, her tears already dried, her expression cold and calculating, as she studied the space where Cade and Mira had stood together only minutes before, her hands curled into tight fists at her sides. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to lose him now. Not to some quiet healer with gentle hands and kind eyes, not when she was so close to everything she had ever wanted. Whatever it took, she would make sure the pack believed her lie was the truth. Even if it meant destroying an innocent woman to do it. Vera slipped through the back door of the small stone cottage, just as the moon reached its highest point, her arms wrapped tightly around herself despite the mild night air. Leela was already waiting, pacing in front of the hearth, her golden hair loose and wild around her shoulders. "You were seen," Vera said without preamble. "Half the pack thinks you have lost your mind, accusing the healer in front of everyone like that." "Let them think what they want," Lila snapped, spinning to face her. "As long as they believe the bond is real, nothing else matters." Vera hesitated, glancing toward the small wooden box sitting on the table between them, its lid slightly ajar, revealing a cluster of dried silver leaves inside. "The herb is not lasting as long as it used to, you know that. Each time you use it, the effect fades faster." Lila's jaw tightened. She crossed the room and snatched the box up, cradling it almost protectively against her chest. "Then we use more." "There isn't more," Vera said quietly. "Not easily gotten anyway. That plant only grows near the old ruins, past the northern ridge, and even then only during certain seasons. We used the last of what I gathered 2 moons ago." Lila's composure cracked for just a moment, fear flashing behind her eyes before she smoothed it away again. "Then we will find more. I don't care what it takes." "Lila," Vera's voice softened, though worry lined every word. "Even if we find more, this cannot last forever. Cade is already starting to doubt. I saw his face tonight. He looked at you like he was trying to remember a dream that was already slipping away." "He loves me," Lila said, though the words came out sharper than she intended, almost desperate. "He has loved me since we were children. This bond, real or not, is only proving what should have always been true. We were meant to be together. I simply needed a little help to make him see it." Vera said nothing for a long moment, staring at her old friend with an expression caught somewhere between pity and fear. She had known Lila since they were pups running through these same forests, chasing fireflies beneath a different moon, a simpler time before ambition had hardened into something colder. "And the healer?" Vera finally asked. "What happens to her?" Lila's eyes darkened. "She becomes a distraction. The pack no longer trusts. If they believe she has been using her position to manipulate the alpha, they will turn against her on their own. I won't even need to do much more." "She has done nothing wrong," Vera said carefully. "Neither have I," Lila said, though even she seemed to hear the hollowness in her own words. "I am simply protecting what belongs to me." Vera looked away, unable to meet her friend's gaze any longer. She had agreed to help Lila months ago, back when it had seemed like a small thing, a private matter between old friends, trying to nudge fate along a path it should have already taken. She had told herself it was harmless. A little herb in his tea, a suggestion planted here and there. nothing that could truly hurt anyone. But watching Lila now, watching the desperate, glittering hunger in her eyes, Vera felt a cold unease settle deep in her stomach. This had stopped being harmless a long time ago. "I need you to gather more of the leaves," Lila said, setting the box down and turning to face the fire. "Tomorrow, before the next full moon, if the bond weakens any further, Cade will start asking questions we cannot answer." "The northern ridge is dangerous," Vera said. "Rogue wolves have been spotted near there, packless wolves with nothing to lose." "I don't care," Lila said coldly. "Find a way." Vera swallowed her protest, nodding slowly despite the unease twisting tighter in her chest. She had never been able to say no to Lila, not since they were children, not even when every instinct told her she should. Meanwhile, across the packlands, Cade sat alone in his study, staring at the dying embers in his fireplace, unable to shake the strange, unsettled feeling that had followed him since the confrontation in the hall. He rubbed absently at his chest, right where that odd warmth had bloomed earlier when Mira had stood before him, gathering her things with trembling hands despite her calm words. He had known Lila for as long as he could remember. Their families had been close, their pack elders had often joked, half seriously, about the two of them one day leading the pack together. He had cared for her deeply throughout his life, the way one cares for a friend who has always been present, always familiar. But a mate bond was something else entirely. The old stories described it as unmistakable, an instant, undeniable recognition between two souls. His grandmother, before she passed, had told him it felt like coming home to a place he had never been before, like finally hearing a song his heart had always known the words to, but had never been sung aloud. He had never felt that with Lila. Not once, despite her insistence, despite the months she had spent hinting at a connection between them. He had felt nothing beyond the comfortable warmth of old friendship. And yet when he thought of Mira's face tonight, pale and shaken but resolute, something in his chest had stirred in a way he could not explain. He told himself it was simply concern, sympathy for someone unfairly accused, but the warmth lingered long after she had gone, refusing to fade no matter how he tried to reason it away. A knock sounded at his study door. "Come in," he called, straightening in his chair. Elder Corwin entered, his weathered face lined with the wisdom of many decades, his silver hair catching the dim firelight. He had served as the pack's spiritual guide for as long as Cade had been alive, and his counsel had never once steered the pack wrong. "I heard about what happened in the hall," Corwin said, settling into the chair across from Cade's desk without waiting for an invitation. "The whole pack is talking of little else." Cade sighed heavily, running a hand through his dark hair. "Lila insists we share a mate bond. I have felt nothing of the sort, yet she speaks of it with such certainty that I have begun to wonder if perhaps I am simply failing to recognize something everyone else can see plainly." Corwin studied him for a long moment, his pale eyes sharp despite his age. "Tell me, when she speaks of this bond, what do you feel?" Cade considered the question carefully before answering. Confusion mostly, a strange pull toward her at times. Though it fades as quickly as it comes, it never feels steady, never feels like something built to last. "And the healer?" Corwin asked. "Mira, what do you feel when you are near her?" Cade hesitated, surprised by the question, though he supposed it should not have surprised him at all, given the accusations that had been thrown so publicly tonight. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Something warm. Something steady, even in the middle of chaos. It doesn't fade the way it does with Lila. If anything, it seems to grow stronger the more time passes." Corwin nodded slowly, as though Cade had merely confirmed something he already suspected. "A true bond does not flicker, Alpha. It does not come and go, depending on the moment, depending on proximity, or mood, or circumstance. It is constant, unshakable. Whatever you feel with Lila, whatever she insists you share, does not sound like the bond described in our oldest stories." "Then what is it?" Cade asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Why would she lie about something so easily disproven? Bonds cannot simply be declared into existence. "No," Corwin agreed slowly, his expression darkening with something close to suspicion. "They cannot be declared. But there are old, forbidden methods, herbs and rituals long abandoned by our people, that can mimic the sensations of a bond, at least temporarily, at least enough to deceive the mind if not the soul. Cade's blood ran cold. You believe she is using something against me? I believe, Corwin said carefully, that you should trust your instincts over your memory. Whatever confusion Lila's words have planted in your mind, your wolf knows the truth, even if your conscious thoughts have been muddled. Pay attention to what your instincts tell you, Alpha, especially in moments when logic has been clouded. Cade sat back in his chair, the weight of Corwin's words settling heavily over him. He thought again of Mira's face, the steady warmth he felt whenever she was near, so different from the flickering, inconsistent pull Lila insisted was proof of their bond. I need to speak with Mira again, he said quietly. Properly. Away from the pack, away from accusations and public spectacle. Corwin nodded approvingly. That would be wise. But be careful, Alpha. If Lila is indeed using some forbidden method to manipulate your feelings, she will not take kindly to anything that threatens to expose her. Watch your steps carefully in the days ahead. Cade nodded, though a heavy unease had already begun settling into his chest, a quiet certainty that the simple confusion of tonight was only the beginning of something far larger and far more dangerous than he had first believed. Outside, beneath the same full moon, Mira lay awake in her small cottage at the edge of the packlands, staring up at the wooden ceiling above her bed, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. The strange warmth in her chest had not faded, even hours after leaving the pack hall. If anything, it pulsed steadily now, like a second heartbeat matched perfectly to her own. She pressed a hand against her sternum, frowning into the darkness. She had never experienced anything like this before, not in all her years serving as the pack's healer, not in all the quiet, uneventful nights she had spent alone in this cottage, tending to herbs and old medical texts long into the night. Something had shifted tonight. Something deep within her, ancient and instinctive, had stirred awake for the very first time. She did not yet understand what it meant, but some small, quiet part of her, buried beneath years of careful discipline and quiet solitude, already suspected the truth, even if she was not yet ready to name it aloud. Whatever was happening to her, whatever strange pull had taken root in her chest tonight, it was only just beginning. 3 days passed, and the whispers in the pack showed no sign of fading. Mira felt them everywhere she went. In the marketplace where vendors who once greeted her warmly now offered only tight, uncertain smiles. In the training grounds where young wolves fell silent whenever she passed. In the way conversations seemed to stop and start again the moment she entered a room. She tried to focus on her work. A young pup named Ollie had fallen from a low tree branch and needed his wrist wrapped. An elderly wolf named Tobias suffered from aching joints that worsened whenever the weather turned. These were the things Mira understood, the rhythms of healing and care that had defined her life since she was old enough to remember her mother teaching her the names of medicinal herbs. But even as she worked, she could not shake the strange, persistent warmth that had settled in her chest since the night of the accusation. It pulsed gently throughout the day, sometimes fading to a whisper, sometimes flaring bright and insistent, always tugging her attention toward the center of the packlands, toward the Alpha's house standing tall on the hill above the village. She told herself repeatedly that it meant nothing: exhaustion, stress, the lingering shock of being publicly humiliated in front of the entire pack. But deep down, in the quiet hours of early morning, when she lay awake staring at her ceiling, she knew the explanation did not quite fit. That afternoon, as she knelt beside Tobias's small garden, mixing a fresh poultice for his aching knees, a shadow fell across her workspace. She looked up to find Nora, one of the younger pack members, and one of the few who still greeted Mira with genuine warmth, standing nearby with an uncertain expression. "Mira," Nora said quietly, glancing around as though checking for eavesdroppers. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course." Mira set down her mortar and pestle, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it?" Nora hesitated, chewing her lower lip. "I don't believe what Lila said, about you and the Alpha. I just wanted you to know that." Relief washed through Mira, unexpected and warm. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "But," Nora continued, glancing around again, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I overheard something strange last night. My mother was talking with one of the elder council members." They were discussing whether the pack should hold a formal inquiry to determine whether you have been using your position as healer to influence the alpha. Mira's stomach twisted painfully. An inquiry? Based on what evidence? I don't know the details, Nora admitted. But Lila has been speaking with several council members privately over the past few days. I think she is trying to build support for some kind of formal accusation. Mira closed her eyes briefly, trying to steady her racing thoughts. A formal inquiry within the pack was no small matter. It could result in serious consequences, exile among the most severe, should the council determine sufficient evidence of wrongdoing existed, regardless of whether that evidence was true or fabricated. Thank you for telling me, Mira said finally, forcing calm into her voice, despite the fear building steadily in her chest. I appreciate you trusting me with this. Nora nodded, offering a small, sympathetic smile before hurrying off toward her own errands, leaving Mira alone with Tobias's half-finished poultice and a mind now racing with worry. She finished her work as quickly as she could, her hands moving through familiar motions on autopilot while her thoughts spiraled through every possible outcome. If the council did move forward with a formal inquiry, she would need evidence of her own innocence, evidence that might prove difficult to produce against accusations built on nothing but Lila's tearful insistence and the pack's willingness to believe a story dramatic enough to hold their attention. That evening, as the sun began sinking below the tree line, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, Mira made her way toward the small stream that ran along the eastern edge of the packlands, a quiet place she often visited when she needed to clear her thoughts. The water moved gently over smooth stones, the sound soothing in a way that had comforted her since childhood. She had not expected to find anyone else there. Cade stood near the water's edge, his back to her, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the fading light. He must have heard her approach, because he turned before she could retreat, his dark eyes finding hers immediately across the small clearing. Mira, he said, seeming almost as surprised to see her as she was to see him. I didn't expect anyone else to be here. I could say the same, she replied, though she made no move to leave. The strange warmth in her chest had flared the moment she saw him, steady and insistent, impossible to ignore, now that they stood so close together in the quiet evening light. How have you been? Cade asked, his voice softer than the commanding tone he used in the pack hall, softer than she had ever heard it before. I know these past few days have been difficult. I've managed, Mira said, though the exhaustion in her voice betrayed the truth of just how difficult things had actually been. Though I heard something troubling today, that the council may be considering a formal inquiry against me. Cade's expression darkened immediately, his jaw tightening. I was not aware of this. Nora overheard her mother discussing it, Mira explained. Apparently Lila has been speaking privately with several council members. Cade cursed softly under his breath, running a frustrated hand through his dark hair. I will not allow a formal inquiry to proceed, based on nothing but accusations without evidence. This has gone far enough. I appreciate that, Mira said quietly, but I worry that stopping it yourself might only fuel further suspicion. If you intervene too directly, some may say you are simply protecting me because of feelings you don't wish to acknowledge. Cade's eyes met hers, something unreadable flickering across his features. And would that be so terrible, if I did have feelings I had not yet acknowledged? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications, neither of them seemed quite ready to name aloud. Mira felt her pulse quicken, the warmth in her chest intensifying until it felt almost impossible to breathe normally. Cade, she said carefully, whatever is happening between us, whatever this feeling is that I cannot explain, we cannot act on it while Lila's accusations still hang over the pack. It would only prove her right in the eyes of everyone watching. I know, Cade admitted, his shoulders sagging slightly with the weight of frustration. I know you're right, but it grows harder every day to pretend I don't feel something whenever you're near. Something I have never felt before, not with Lila, not with anyone. Mira's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to ask him more, wanted to understand what exactly he meant, but a rustling sound in the nearby bushes interrupted the moment, both of them turning sharply toward the noise. A young wolf named Callum emerged from the trees, clearly startled to find them both there. Alpha, he said quickly, bowing his head respectfully. Forgive the interruption. Elder Corwin requests your presence immediately. He says it's urgent. Cade's expression shifted instantly back into the composed authority of an alpha, though Mira caught the brief flash of reluctance in his eyes before he nodded toward Callum. I'll come at once. He glanced back at Mira, one final time, before following Callum back toward the village, his expression carrying an unspoken promise that this conversation was far from finished. Mira remained by the stream long after he had gone, watching the water ripple gently over the smooth stones, her mind spinning with everything that had just been said and everything that had been left unspoken. Whatever strange connection was growing between them, it felt undeniable now, impossible to dismiss as mere imagination or wishful thinking. But undeniable did not mean safe. Not while Lila continued weaving her accusations through the pack, gathering support among the council members, building towards something that could threaten far more than Mira's reputation. As she finally rose to head home, the last light of evening fading into deep twilight, Mira felt a chill settle over her that had nothing to do with the cooling air. Somewhere in the shadows of the packlands, she knew Lila was watching, waiting, planning her next move with the same cold determination that had driven her to publicly accuse an innocent healer without a shred of real evidence. Whatever came next, Mira understood one thing with absolute certainty. This was far from over. Meanwhile, in Elder Corwin's private chambers, Cade found the old wolf pacing anxiously near the window, his weathered face creased with worry. What's happened? Cade asked immediately, closing the door behind him. Corwin turned, his pale eyes sharp with concern. I have been making inquiries of my own these past few days, Alpha. Quiet ones, careful ones, and what I have discovered troubles me greatly. Tell me, Cade said, bracing himself for whatever news had put such worry into the old elder's expression. There are old texts, Corwin said slowly, describing forbidden methods once used by desperate wolves to force feelings of bonding where none naturally existed. Herbs gathered from dangerous, forgotten places. Rituals abandoned generations ago for the harm they caused both the deceiver and the deceived. Cade's blood ran cold. You believe Lila has been using such methods against me? I believe, Corwin said carefully, that we need to discover the truth before the council moves forward with any formal action against Mira. If Lila has indeed been manipulating you through forbidden means, the consequences of exposing such treachery will need to be handled with extreme care. Cade's hands curled into tight fists at his sides, anger and betrayal warring within his chest, at the mere possibility that someone he had trusted since childhood could have deceived him so completely. Then we find proof, he said, his voice hardening with determination. Whatever it takes. Corwin nodded gravely. Whatever it takes, Alpha, before it's too late for either of them. The council chamber was already full by the time Mira arrived, every seat along the long wooden table occupied by pack elders, whose expressions ranged from stern to openly hostile. She had been summoned that morning, with little explanation, beyond a folded note, delivered by a young messenger, requesting her presence at midday without fail. She had known, the moment she read those words, exactly what was about to happen. Mira, daughter of Elena, announced the council secretary, an older wolf named Grant whose voice carried the flat, formal tone of official proceedings. You have been summoned before this council to answer accusations brought against you by Lila regarding conduct unbecoming a pack healer and interference in matters concerning the Alpha's personal bonds. Mira stood at the center of the chamber, her chin lifted despite the fear coiling tightly in her stomach. She had chosen her simplest healer's robes for the occasion, hoping the familiar garments might remind the council of exactly who she was and what she had spent years dedicating her life to. I am aware of the accusations, Mira said, her voice steady despite everything. And I maintain, as I have from the beginning, that they are entirely false. Lila sat near the front of the gathered crowd, her expression carefully arranged into one of wounded dignity, dabbing occasionally at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief whenever she sensed the council's attention shifting toward sympathy. The council has heard testimony, Grant continued, consulting a scroll of notes before him, suggesting a pattern of behavior on your part, frequent visits to the Alpha's private study, prolonged conversations away from public spaces, and most recently, a private meeting near the eastern stream, witnessed by a pack member, just yesterday evening. Mira's stomach dropped. She had not realized anyone had seen her and Cade at the stream, had not considered that even something so innocent might be twisted into further evidence against her. Every visit to the Alpha's study has been for medical purposes, Mira said, keeping her voice level despite the mounting pressure building in her chest. As for the meeting at the stream, it was entirely coincidental. We happened upon each other while I was gathering herbs along the water's edge. Coincidental, Lila repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism as she rose from her seat, clearly having anticipated this exact moment to interject. How many coincidences must this council witness before recognizing a pattern? She is always where he is, always ready with some innocent explanation. Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd, several council members exchanging uncertain glances. Mira felt the tide of the room shifting against her with every passing moment, the careful reputation she had built over years of quiet, dedicated service, dissolving beneath the weight of Lila's carefully constructed narrative. The heavy chamber doors swung open before anyone could respond further, and Cade strode into the room, his expression thunderous, Elder Corwin following close behind him. "I was not informed this proceeding had begun," Cade said, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly silent chamber. "As Alpha, I should have been present from the start." Grant cleared his throat nervously. "Forgive the oversight, Alpha. We believed, given your personal connection to the matter, that your presence might complicate the proceedings." "My presence," Cade said coldly, "is required whenever accusations are made regarding my personal conduct and bonds. I will not have this council make determinations about my private life, based on testimony I have not had the opportunity to address." He moved to stand beside Mira, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the tension crackling through the room. The gesture did not go unnoticed. Several council members exchanged pointed glances, and Lila's carefully composed expression cracked for just a moment, fury flashing behind her eyes, before she smoothed it away again. "Alpha," Lila said, forcing gentleness back into her voice, "I understand you feel protective of her, given the confusion clouding your mind these past weeks. But surely you can see how this only strengthens the concerns this council has raised." "The only confusion clouding my mind," Cade said sharply, "has been trying to understand why you insist on a bond that has never once felt real to me. I have given this careful thought, Lila, and I can say with absolute certainty that whatever connection you believe exists between us does not match anything I have ever experienced with you." A shocked silence fell over the chamber. Lila's face drained of color, her composure slipping entirely for the first time since the accusations had begun. "You don't mean that," she said, her voice suddenly small, desperate. "You're only saying this because of her influence." "I am saying this," Cade replied firmly, "because it is the truth, and I believe this council deserves the truth before proceeding any further with accusations that could unfairly destroy an innocent woman's reputation and standing within this pack." Elder Corwin stepped forward then, his weathered voice carrying the quiet authority earned through decades of wisdom and service. "If I may address the council directly." Grant nodded, clearly relieved to have someone else guide the increasingly tense proceedings. "Please, Elder." "I have spent recent days researching old pack histories," Corwin began, his pale eyes sweeping across the gathered crowd, "specifically regarding the nature of true mate bonds and the various forbidden methods once used, generations ago, to artificially mimic such bonds. Our ancestors abandoned these practices for good reason, recognizing the harm they caused, both to the deceiver and the deceived." Lila's breathing had grown visibly unsteady, her hands twisting the delicate handkerchief into a tight, wrinkled knot. "I do not yet have definitive proof," Corwin continued carefully, "but I believe this council would be wise to postpone any formal judgment against Mira until a proper investigation can determine the true nature of the situation before us. Rushing to punish an innocent woman based on unverified claims would be a grave injustice, one this council would carry the weight of for many years to come." A tense murmur swept through the chamber as council members exchanged uncertain glances, clearly weighing the implications of Corwin's careful words. Grant cleared his throat again, glancing toward the other elders seated along the table. "The council will take Elder Corwin's counsel under advisement," Grant announced finally. This proceeding is postponed, pending further investigation. Mira, you remain free to continue your duties within the pack, while this matter is resolved. Relief flooded through Mira so intensely that her knees nearly buckled beneath her, though she forced herself to remain composed, offering the council a respectful nod despite the storm of emotions churning inside her chest. Lila, however, looked as though the ground had shifted violently beneath her feet. She rose from her seat, her expression a mixture of fury and barely concealed panic. "This is absurd," she said, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You would take the word of an old man's suspicions over the testimony of someone who has known the Alpha her entire life?" "I would take the word of careful investigation over hasty judgment," Grant replied firmly. "This council session is adjourned." The chamber slowly emptied, wolves filing out in small clusters, whispering among themselves about the dramatic turn the proceedings had taken. Mira remained rooted in place for a long moment, still processing the sudden, unexpected reprieve, before Cade's hand found hers gently, his fingers warm and steady against her own. "Thank you," she whispered, meeting his eyes, "for standing beside me." "I should have done it sooner," Cade replied quietly. "I let confusion cloud my judgment for far too long. I won't make that mistake again." Across the emptying chamber, Lila stood alone, her hands trembling at her sides, watching the two of them with an expression of pure, undisguised hatred. Whatever careful plans she had constructed over the past months were beginning to crumble, piece by piece, faster than she could repair them. She needed more of the herb. She needed it desperately, before Corwin's investigation uncovered the truth she had worked so hard to bury. Turning sharply on her heel, she stormed from the chamber, already formulating her next desperate move, unaware that the very foundation of her carefully constructed lie had already begun to crack beyond any hope of repair. Vera moved carefully through the dense undergrowth near the northern ridge, her senses stretched thin with tension as the last light of afternoon filtered weakly through the canopy above. The silver leaves Lila needed grew only in scattered patches near the old ruins, half hidden beneath tangled roots and jagged stone, and gathering enough would take hours she did not particularly want to spend so close to rogue territory. She worked quickly, her fingers stained faintly green as she stripped leaves from low, twisting vines and tucked them carefully into the woven pouch at her hip. Every rustle of wind through the branches made her pause, ears straining for any sound that did not belong, any hint of unfamiliar scent carried on the breeze. She had almost finished when a low growl rumbled from the shadows behind her. Vera spun sharply, her heart lurching into her throat, as three unfamiliar wolves emerged from the tree line, their eyes glinting with hostile hunger in the fading light. Rogues, packless wolves who answered to no laws, no counsel, no code of honor beyond their own survival. "This is pack territory," Vera said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the fear pounding through her veins. "You are not welcome here." The largest of the three, a scarred, gray-furred wolf with cold yellow eyes, stepped forward slowly, his posture radiating quiet menace. Territory means little to those who have none of their own. Vera's hand drifted instinctively toward the small dagger sheathed at her belt, though she knew, even as she did so, that 3 against 1 left her at a severe disadvantage. She needed to retreat, needed to escape before the situation escalated into something she could not survive. "I have no quarrel with you," she said carefully, backing slowly toward the tree line. "I will leave your path and trouble you no further." The gray wolf's lips curled back over sharp teeth. "Generous of you, but we've grown hungry, and prey wandering so far from its pack rarely goes unnoticed." Vera's pulse spiked with terror as the 3 wolves began circling, cutting off any clear path of retreat. She opened her mouth to shout for help, though she doubted anyone would hear her cry from so far beyond the pack's usual patrol routes, when a sudden, powerful howl split the air, deep and commanding, echoing across the ridge with unmistakable authority. The rogue wolves froze instantly, their ears pinning back at the sound. Moments later, Cade burst through the tree line, his massive wolf form radiating barely contained fury, flanked by 2 pack warriors who had been running the border patrol nearby. The rogues, recognizing immediately that they were now outmatched and outnumbered, exchanged uneasy glances before retreating swiftly back into the shadows without further confrontation. Cade shifted back into his human form the moment the threat had cleared, striding quickly toward Vera, who stood frozen and shaking near the tree line. "Are you injured?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern, despite the underlying authority that never quite left his tone. "No," Vera managed, still trembling from the encounter. "Thank you, Alpha. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't arrived." Cade's gaze drifted toward the woven pouch at her hip, noticing the faint green stains on her fingers, the telltale silver leaves peeking from the opening. His expression shifted, something calculating flickering behind his dark eyes. "What were you gathering out here, so far from the packlands?" he asked carefully. Vera's mind raced, searching desperately for a plausible explanation. "Medicinal herbs," she said quickly, "for an ailment troubling my mother." Cade said nothing for a long moment, simply studying her with an unreadable expression that made her stomach twist with unease. "I was not aware Silver Ridge leaf held any medicinal properties," he said finally. "In fact, I believe our healer has spoken of it primarily in connection with much older, less benevolent purposes." Vera's face paled visibly, though she forced a shaky smile, clutching the pouch tighter against her hip. "I must be mistaken about the name, Alpha. I am no expert in herbs." "Perhaps," Cade said, though his tone made clear he did not fully believe her. "Regardless, it is not safe for you to travel so far beyond the pack borders alone, especially with rogues active in this area. I will have one of my warriors escort you back to the village." Vera nodded quickly, grateful for the excuse to end the conversation, though the weight of Cade's suspicious gaze followed her, long after she had turned to walk alongside the assigned warrior, back toward the safety of the packlands. Once she had disappeared from sight, Cade turned to the two warriors who had accompanied him. "Follow her discreetly," he instructed quietly. "I want to know exactly where those leaves end up, and who receives them." The warriors nodded, splitting off silently to trail Vera's path from a careful distance, while Cade remained standing near the tree line, his thoughts churning with the growing certainty that Corwin's suspicions had been correct all along. Later that evening, back within the walls of the Alpha's private study, Cade paced restlessly, while Corwin sat calmly nearby, patiently waiting for him to organize his racing thoughts into coherent words. "Silver Ridge leaf," Cade said finally, stopping his pacing to face the old elder directly. "Vera was gathering it near the northern ruins. She tried to claim it was for medicinal purposes, but her reaction when I named the plant correctly told me everything I needed to know." Corwin's expression darkened gravely. "Silver Ridge leaf, when properly prepared, creates a temporary sensory illusion, mimicking the early stages of a mate bond. It affects both scent perception and emotional response, though the effect fades steadily with each subsequent use, requiring larger and more frequent doses to maintain the illusion over time." "That would explain everything," Cade said, anger building steadily in his voice. "The inconsistency of what I've felt around Lila, the way it seemed stronger some days than others. She has been drugging me, manipulating my senses to believe in a bond that never existed." "It would appear so," Corwin agreed solemnly, "though we still lack definitive proof suitable for presenting before the full council. Suspicion alone, however strong, will not be enough to clear Mira's name completely or hold Lila properly accountable for her deception." Cade's hands curled into tight fists, fury and betrayal warring fiercely within his chest. "Then we need proof. Direct evidence, linking Lila to the herb's use against me." "Patience, Alpha," Corwin cautioned gently. "If Lila realizes we suspect the truth, she may destroy any remaining evidence before we have the chance to expose her properly. We must proceed carefully, methodically, until we have gathered enough proof to present an undeniable case before the council." Cade forced himself to take a slow, steadying breath, nodding reluctantly despite the impatience burning through him. "How long will that take?" "I cannot say for certain," Corwin admitted, "but I sense we are drawing closer to the truth with each passing day. Trust the process, Alpha. And trust what your instincts have already told you about where the true bond lies." Cade's thoughts drifted immediately to Mira, to the steady, unwavering warmth he felt whenever she was near, so different from the inconsistent confusion Lila's manipulation had created within him. Whatever forbidden method Leela had used to deceive him, it had never once matched the genuine, undeniable connection he felt toward Mira. His wolf, he realized with sudden clarity, had already recognized the truth long before his conscious mind had caught up to the reality unfolding before him. Somewhere across the pack lands, unaware of the warriors quietly monitoring her movements, Vera delivered the freshly gathered silver ridge leaves to Lila's private chambers, both women unaware that the careful web of lies they had spent months constructing was already beginning to unravel, thread by thread, moving inevitably toward a truth that could no longer be contained. Lila paced restlessly within her chambers, the freshly gathered silver leaves spread across her table, though something about them looked different from before, duller somehow, less vibrant than the batches Vera had gathered in previous months. "Are you certain these are fresh?" Lila asked, lifting one of the leaves toward the candlelight, examining it with growing suspicion. "They're what grew there," Vera said tiredly, still shaken from her encounter near the ridge. "The plant itself may simply be past its peak season. I nearly didn't make it back at all, Lila. Rogues nearly caught me, and the Alpha himself found me gathering them." Lila's hands stilled instantly. "Cade found you? What did you tell him?" "That I was gathering herbs for my mother's ailment," Vera said. "But he knew, Lila. He named the plant correctly, Silver Ridge Leaf, and mentioned its connection to something other than medicine. I don't think he believed my explanation for a moment." Panic flickered behind Lila's eyes before she forced it down, straightening her shoulders with practiced composure. "Then we have very little time left. If he suspects the herb, he will begin searching for proof, and Corwin will help him find it. Maybe," Vera said carefully, "it's time to stop, before this goes any further, before someone truly gets hurt." "Stop?" Lila's laugh came out sharp and humorless. "After everything I've sacrificed to get this far, I won't simply hand him over to that healer without a fight." "Lila," Vera said, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of everything she had witnessed over the past months. "He doesn't love you. Not the way you want him to. Perhaps he never has. Continuing this deception will only end in disaster, for both of us." Lila's expression hardened into something cold and unfamiliar, a version of her old friend Vera barely recognized anymore. "You forget your place," Lila said quietly. "You agreed to help me. You cannot simply walk away now because your conscience has finally decided to bother you." Vera fell silent, fear and guilt warring visibly across her face, though she said nothing further to argue against Lila's determination. The next morning, Mira woke earlier than usual, drawn from restless sleep by a strange, insistent pull deep in her chest, stronger than she had ever felt it before. She dressed quickly, her instincts screaming at her to move, to seek out something, though she could not consciously identify what exactly she was searching for. She found herself walking toward the training grounds at the center of the packlands, where the morning air still carried the cool freshness of early dawn. She spotted Cade immediately, standing near the edge of the field, deep in conversation with two warriors she recognized as members of his personal guard. The moment his eyes lifted and found hers across the distance, the pull in her chest intensified so sharply that she nearly gasped aloud. Something ancient and instinctive surged within her, demanding she close the distance between them immediately, though she forced herself to remain composed as she approached. "Mira," Cade said, dismissing the warriors with a small gesture as she drew near. "I wasn't expecting to see you this morning." "Neither was I," she admitted, pressing a hand briefly against her chest. "I woke feeling strange, restless, drawn somewhere I couldn't quite explain until I saw you standing here." Cade's expression shifted immediately, understanding flickering behind his dark eyes. "I've been meaning to speak with you about something important. Corwin and I have uncovered evidence suggesting Lila has been using a forbidden herb to manipulate my senses, creating the illusion of a bond that never actually existed between us." Mira's breath caught sharply. "You believe she's been drugging you this entire time?" "I do," Cade confirmed grimly, "though we still lack definitive proof suitable for the council. Corwin believes we're close to uncovering everything, but we must proceed carefully." Mira absorbed this information slowly, pieces of the past week's strange events beginning to click together with unsettling clarity. "That would explain so much," she murmured, "the inconsistency of her claims." the way the pack seemed almost too willing to believe her without proper evidence. "There's something else," Cade said quietly, stepping closer, close enough that Mira could feel the warmth radiating from him, steady and unwavering, in a way that had never once flickered or faded since that very first night in the pack hall. "This feeling between us, the one I cannot explain no matter how hard I try to reason it away. I don't believe it's confusion anymore, Mira. I believe it's something far more significant." Mira's heart pounded rapidly against her ribs, the pull in her chest intensifying until it felt almost impossible to ignore any longer. "I've felt it too," she admitted softly. "Since that very first night. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, anything other than what it actually might be." "And what do you believe it actually is?" Cade asked, his voice barely above a whisper now, the space between them shrinking with every passing second. Before Mira could answer, a sudden, sharp pain lanced through her chest, so intense that she gasped aloud, stumbling backward as her vision blurred momentarily at the edges. Her wolf, restless and insistent for days now, surged violently against her control, demanding release in a way she had never experienced before. "Mira?" Cade's voice carried sharp concern, reaching to steady her as her knees threatened to buckle beneath the sudden overwhelming sensation coursing through her body. "Something's happening," she gasped, pressing both hands against her chest as the pain intensified further, her vision flickering between human sight and something sharper, more instinctive. I don't understand what's happening to me." Her skin rippled beneath her clothing, fine fur beginning to emerge along her arms despite her desperate attempts to maintain control. An involuntary partial shift, triggered by emotions and instincts too powerful to suppress any longer, began overtaking her body right there in the middle of the training grounds. "Mira, look at me," Cade said urgently, gripping her shoulders firmly, despite the fur now covering portions of her skin. "Focus on my voice. Breathe." But it was too late to stop what had already been set into motion. A powerful, involuntary howl tore from Mira's throat, unlike any sound she had ever produced before, carrying across the training grounds and beyond, echoing through the packlands with an unmistakable resonance that only true mates could recognize between one another. Cade froze instantly, the sound striking something deep and primal within him, his own wolf surging forward with sudden, undeniable recognition. He had heard that exact resonance described before, in old stories his grandmother had shared during his childhood, in Corwin's careful teachings about the true nature of mate bonds. His wolf had heard the call, and it was answering, powerfully and instinctively, without any need for conscious thought or careful reasoning. Across the packlands, warriors and villagers alike paused in their morning routines, heads turning toward the direction of the training grounds, drawn by the powerful resonance of a call none of them had heard in generations, a call that could mean only one thing within their ancient traditions. A true mate bond, awakening at last, undeniable and absolute. Mira slowly regained control over her body, the fur retreating, her breathing gradually steadying as the overwhelming intensity of the moment began to fade. She looked up to find Cade staring down at her with an expression of stunned, wondering recognition, his hands still steadying her shoulders gently. "You heard it too," she whispered, understanding dawning slowly across her features. "That sound? You recognized it." "I did," Cade confirmed, his voice thick with emotion he could no longer suppress or explain away. "Mira, I believe my wolf has already chosen you as his true mate." The words hung suspended in the morning air between them, carrying implications neither of them was fully prepared to process, though neither could deny the undeniable truth now confirmed by instincts far older and more powerful than either of their conscious minds could have ever manufactured on their own. Somewhere across the village, Lila froze mid-conversation, her blood running cold as the distant resonance of that powerful, unmistakable call reached her ears, understanding immediately, with sickening certainty, exactly what it meant. Her carefully constructed lie was about to collapse entirely. News of the mysterious call spread through the packlands within the hour, whispered from house to house with growing excitement and confusion. No one had heard such a resonance in living memory, and speculation ran wild through every corner of the village, though only a handful of wolves understood its true significance. Elder Corwin arrived at the training grounds within minutes of hearing the news, his weathered face carrying an expression Mira had never seen on him before, something close to genuine astonishment mixed with profound relief. "Tell me everything," Corwin said, studying both Cade and Mira carefully as they stood together, still slightly shaken from the intensity of what had just occurred between them. Cade recounted the moment as best he could, describing the sudden pain that had overtaken Mira, the involuntary partial shift, the powerful howl that had resonated through the packlands and struck something deep within his own wolf, an instinctive recognition he could not have consciously manufactured, even if he had wanted to. Corwin listened intently, nodding slowly as the pieces fell into place before him. "This confirms everything I suspected," he said finally. "A true mate bond, suppressed and denied for weeks, likely due to the confusion caused by Lila's manipulation, finally breaking through with undeniable force." "How can we prove this to the council?" Mira asked, still struggling to fully process everything that had happened over the past hour. "A sound alone, however powerful, may not be enough to convince everyone, especially those who have already been swayed by Lila's accusations." Corwin's expression grew thoughtful. "There exists an old pack ritual, rarely performed in recent generations due to its complexity, that allows verification of a true mate bond through elemental magic. It requires the participation of both parties before a witnessing council, and it cannot be falsified or manipulated by any herb or artificial means." "Then we should request it immediately," Cade said firmly. "If it will settle this matter definitively, before the council and before the entire pack, I want it done as soon as possible." "I will need to make preparations," Corwin said. "The ritual requires specific materials and careful timing, ideally performed beneath a clear night sky. I can have everything ready within 2 days." Cade nodded, though impatience flickered visibly across his features. 2 days feels like an eternity, given everything that's happened. "Patience, Alpha," Corwin said gently. "We are close now, closer than we have been since this entire situation began. Do not let impatience undo the careful progress we have made." As Corwin departed to begin his preparations, Mira remained standing beside Cade, the lingering warmth in her chest, now settled into something steadier, more certain than the confused flickers she had experienced over the past weeks. Whatever had happened between them today, however overwhelming and unexpected, felt undeniably right, in a way nothing else in her recent memory had felt. "Are you frightened?" Cade asked quietly, studying her expression with careful attention. "A little," Mira admitted honestly. "Everything has happened so quickly. A few weeks ago, I was simply the pack healer, quietly going about my duties. Now I find myself at the center of accusations, investigations, and apparently, a true mate bond I never expected to experience." Cade's expression softened, a gentle smile touching his lips for the first time in what felt like weeks. "I understand the feeling, though I will admit, despite everything, I find myself grateful for how it has unfolded. If Lila's deception had never occurred, I might never have paid close enough attention to recognize what was growing between us." Mira managed a small smile of her own, though worry still lingered beneath the surface. "What happens to her, once the truth comes out?" Cade's expression darkened slightly. "That will be for the council to decide, though deceiving an alpha through forbidden means and endangering an innocent pack member through false accusations carries serious consequences within our laws. I do not take pleasure in it, given our history together, but she must answer for what she has done." They spent the remainder of the afternoon together, quietly discussing everything that had transpired, growing steadily more comfortable in each other's presence, as the initial shock of the morning's events gradually settled into something resembling calm acceptance. By evening, word of the impending verification ritual had spread throughout the pack, and the atmosphere within the village shifted palpably, curiosity and cautious hope beginning to replace the earlier suspicion and hostility that had followed Mira for weeks. Not everyone, however, greeted the news with hope. Within her private chambers, Lila sat frozen before her mirror, staring at her own reflection with an expression of growing desperation. Vera stood nearby, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, unable to meet her old friend's eyes. "A verification ritual," Lila whispered, her voice hollow with disbelief. "Corwin means to expose everything before the entire council." "Lila," Vera said carefully, "perhaps it's time to confess. before the ritual happens. It might go easier for you if the truth comes from your own mouth rather than being forced out through magic and public spectacle. Confess? Lila's voice rose sharply, panic bleeding into fury. And lose everything I've worked toward? No, there has to be another way. There isn't, Vera said, her own voice trembling now. The herb cannot fool elemental magic, Lila. Whatever happens during that ritual will reveal the truth beyond any doubt. Running from it now will only make things worse when the truth eventually comes out anyway. Lila's hands curled into tight fists against the surface of her dressing table, her reflection staring back at her with an expression twisted between desperation and simmering rage. I need more time, she muttered, more to herself than to Vera. If I can delay the ritual somehow, buy myself even a few more days, perhaps I can find another way to salvage this. How? Vera asked, exasperation creeping into her voice, despite her lingering loyalty to their old friendship. The entire pack already knows about the call. Cade and Mira are practically inseparable now. There is no salvaging this, Lila. It's over. Lila turned sharply, her eyes blazing with a desperate, dangerous determination Vera had never seen in her before. It is not over until I say it is over. I have sacrificed too much, waited too long, to simply surrender everything without one final attempt. What are you planning? Vera asked, dread settling heavily in her stomach. Lila's expression grew calculating, cold. If the ritual cannot be fooled, then perhaps it simply needs to never happen at all. Vera's blood ran cold at the implication behind those words, understanding immediately that Lila's desperation had crossed into dangerous territory that neither of them could safely return from. Lila, please, Vera whispered. Don't do anything you cannot take back. But Lila was no longer listening, already lost in calculations of her own making, searching desperately for any possible way to prevent the truth from finally catching up to the elaborate web of lies she had spent months carefully constructing. The morning before the scheduled ritual, Mira woke to an unsettling stillness hanging over the packlands, a quiet tension that seemed to seep into every corner of the village, despite the outward calm of daily routines continuing as normal. She dressed quickly and made her way toward Corwin's private chambers, where preparations for the verification ritual had been underway for the past 2 days. She found the old elder examining a collection of ceremonial items spread carefully across his table, silver bowls, bundles of dried herbs, entirely different from the forbidden silver ridge leaf, and a small crystal pendant that seemed to catch and hold the morning light in unusual ways. Everything is nearly ready, Corwin said, glancing up as she entered. We will perform the ritual tonight, beneath the full moon, before the assembled council and any pack members who wish to witness. I appreciate everything you've done, Mira said sincerely, settling into a chair near his table. I know this hasn't been simple, uncovering the truth behind Lila's deception. Corwin's expression grew thoughtful. In truth, child, I suspected something was amiss from the very beginning, a mate bond that flickers and fades, that requires constant reassurance and public declaration, has never matched anything described in our oldest teachings. I simply needed proof strong enough to convince a skeptical council. A soft knock interrupted their conversation, and Callum appeared in the doorway, his expression carrying an urgency that immediately put both Mira and Corwin on alert. Elder, Callum said quickly, there's been an incident. Vera was found near the storage building where the ceremonial supplies are kept. She claims she was simply passing by, but several items appear to have been disturbed. Corwin's eyes narrowed sharply, moving immediately to check the table before him. His expression tightened with concern as he carefully counted through the ceremonial materials laid out before him. The moonstone binding cord is missing, he said grimly. Without it, the ritual cannot properly channel the elemental magic required for accurate verification. Can it be replaced? Mira asked, worry creeping into her voice. Not easily, Corwin admitted. Such cords require careful preparation under specific lunar conditions, a process that typically takes several days to complete properly. Then the ritual will need to be delayed, Callum said. No, Corwin said firmly, his expression hardening with sudden resolve. That is precisely what Lila hopes to accomplish through this theft. We cannot allow her desperation to derail the process any further. I will find another way to complete the ritual tonight, even without the traditional binding cord. Mira watched the old elder move quickly through his supplies, searching for alternative materials, her heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and determination. Whatever Lila was planning, however desperate her actions had become, Mira refused to allow fear to overshadow the truth that had already been confirmed within her own heart and body. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the moon began its slow ascent into the darkening sky, the entire pack gathered within the central clearing at the heart of the village, drawn by curiosity and the undeniable significance of the ceremony about to unfold before them. Council members occupied places of honor near the front, while ordinary pack members filled the surrounding space, murmuring quietly amongst themselves as they waited for the ritual to begin. Cade stood near the center of the clearing, his expression carrying a mixture of anticipation and quiet confidence as Mira approached to join him. Corwin waited nearby, having successfully improvised alternative materials to replace the stolen binding cord, though his expression carried lingering tension over the sabotage attempt. "Are you ready?" Cade asked softly, taking Mira's hand gently as she stood beside him. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, though her voice carried genuine confidence, despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Corwin raised his hands, calling the gathered crowd to silence with practiced authority. "Tonight, we perform a ritual rarely witnessed in recent generations, to verify the presence of a true mate bond between our alpha and the pack healer Mira. This ritual cannot be falsified through any manner of trickery or manipulation. What it reveals will stand as absolute truth before this entire council." A tense hush fell over the clearing as Corwin began the ceremony, his voice rising and falling in the ancient rhythmic cadence of ritual words passed down through countless generations. He poured a mixture of herbs into a silver bowl, lighting them with a small flame that flickered an unusual shade of blue against the darkening sky. Cade and Mira stood facing each other as instructed, their joined hands held above the burning herbs, the smoke curling upward between them in delicate spirals. Mira felt the familiar warmth in her chest intensify steadily as the ritual progressed, building towards something powerful and undeniable. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the edge of the clearing, several voices rising sharply in alarm. Mira's attention snapped toward the disturbance just as Lila burst through the crowd, her expression wild with desperation, a small vial clutched tightly in her trembling hand. "Stop this immediately," Lila shouted, pushing past startled pack members toward the center of the clearing. "This ritual is unnecessary. I am willing to admit that perhaps I was mistaken about the nature of our bond, but there is no need for such a dramatic spectacle." Cade's expression darkened, though he did not release Mira's hands, refusing to allow the ceremony to be interrupted so close to completion. "Lila, step back. This ritual will determine the truth for everyone present, including you." "No," Lila said, her voice cracking with desperation as she raised the vial higher. "You don't understand. If this ritual completes, everything I've built will be destroyed." "Everything you've built was based on a lie," Cade said firmly. "It's time for the truth to finally come out, Lila, regardless of the consequences you fear." Lila's eyes darted wildly around the clearing, taking in the sea of faces watching her with growing suspicion and concern. Whatever plan she had originally intended with the mysterious vial clutched in her hand, the presence of so many witnesses seemed to finally break through her desperate resolve. Her shoulders slumped suddenly, the vial slipping from her trembling fingers to shatter against the ground, releasing a faint, bitter smell that several pack members near the front recognized immediately as another dose of the manipulative herb she had been using all along. "I can't," Lila whispered, tears finally spilling freely down her cheeks, though these tears carried none of the calculated performance from her earlier accusations. "I can't stop this anymore. I'm so tired of pretending." Corwin, his expression grave but not unkind, stepped forward carefully. "Then let the ritual complete, child. Let the truth finally set everyone free from the burden of this deception, including yourself." Lila nodded slowly, sinking to her knees at the edge of the clearing, as the assembled crowd watched in stunned silence, the weight of her public admission settling heavily over the gathered pack. Corwin resumed the ritual, his voice steady despite the interruption, guiding the ceremony toward its powerful conclusion beneath the full, watching moon. The blue flame flickering within the silver bowl grew steadily brighter as Corwin's chanting continued, the ancient words carrying a weight and resonance that seemed to still the very air within the clearing. Mira felt the warmth in her chest, building toward something overwhelming, a pressure that seemed to gather beneath her ribs before spreading outward through every part of her body. Cade's hands tightened gently around hers, his own expression carrying a similar intensity. His dark eyes fixed steadily on hers despite the dramatic scene still unfolding at the edge of the clearing where Lila remained kneeling, tears streaming silently down her face. "Whatever happens," Cade murmured softly, meant only for Mira to hear, "I already know the truth my heart has recognized. This ritual will simply confirm what I have felt every day since that very first night in the pack hall." Mira managed a small, trembling smile despite the mounting intensity building within her chest. "I feel it too," she whispered back. "Stronger than I've ever felt anything in my life." Corwin's voice rose to its final crescendo, the blue flame suddenly flaring bright and brilliant, casting dancing shadows across the surrounding faces of the watching pack. A powerful surge of energy rippled outward from the flame, washing over both Cade and Mira simultaneously, visible even to those watching from the edges of the clearing as a shimmering, golden light that seemed to bind their joined hands together for one breathless, suspended moment. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, the flame settling back into a gentle, steady glow within the silver bowl. Corwin lowered his hands, his weathered face carrying an expression of profound satisfaction. "The ritual is complete," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the silent clearing. "The elemental magic has confirmed, beyond any possibility of doubt or manipulation, the presence of a true and genuine mate bond between our alpha, Cade, and our pack healer, Mira." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled crowd, followed almost immediately by a swelling wave of murmurs and excited whispers. Several pack members who had doubted Mira over the past weeks now looked toward her with expressions of genuine remorse, while others simply stared in wonder at the confirmation of something so rare and precious within their community. Grant, the council secretary, stepped forward from among the gathered elders, his expression carrying solemn authority as he addressed the crowd. "This council formally recognizes and celebrates the true mate bond confirmed here tonight between Alpha Cade and Mira, healer of this pack. All previous accusations brought against Mira are hereby dismissed as entirely unfounded." Relief and joy flooded through Mira so powerfully that tears sprang unbidden to her eyes, Cade's arms wrapping around her gently as the weight of the past difficult weeks finally began lifting from her shoulders. Around them, the pack erupted into a mixture of cheers and excited conversation, the earlier tension and suspicion dissolving rapidly into genuine celebration. Amid the joyful commotion, Grant's expression turned serious once more as he addressed the still kneeling figure of Lila at the edge of the clearing. "Lila, daughter of the Eastern Territory families, you stand accused of using forbidden means to manipulate our alpha's senses and falsely claiming a mate bond that never existed. Your own actions here tonight, along with the shattered vial recovered from this clearing, provide sufficient evidence to confirm these accusations. What do you have to say in your defense?" Lila raised her tear-streaked face slowly, her earlier desperate fire finally extinguished, replaced by something closer to exhausted resignation. "I have nothing to say in my defense," she said quietly. "Everything Corwin suspected was true. I used Silver Ridge Leaf to manipulate Cade's senses, hoping to force a bond into existence that I desperately wanted, but that never actually formed between us naturally. I nearly destroyed an innocent woman's reputation, and standing within this pack, because I could not accept that Cade's heart had never truly belonged to me." Her confession, spoken so plainly and completely before the entire assembled pack, carried a weight that seemed to finally settle the last lingering doubts among those who had witnessed the dramatic events of recent weeks. Grant nodded gravely, turning to consult briefly with the other council elders before addressing Lila once more. "Given your confession and the clear evidence presented tonight, this council finds you guilty of deception against your alpha and false accusation against an innocent pack member. The traditional consequence for such serious violations is exile from packlands, effective immediately." A hushed silence fell over the clearing as the severity of the judgment settled over everyone present. Lila's shoulders sagged further, though she offered no protest, seeming to accept the consequence as an inevitable result of choices she herself had made. "I understand," she said quietly, rising slowly to her feet. Before she turned to leave, her eyes found Cade's across the clearing, carrying a complicated mixture of regret, lingering affection, and finally, genuine acceptance. "I am sorry, Cade, for everything. You deserved honesty from me, and I gave you deception instead. I hope you find happiness with the bond you were always meant to have." Cade studied her for a long moment, old memories of childhood friendship warring against the betrayal of recent weeks within his expression. "I hope you find peace, Lila," he said finally, his voice carrying no malice despite everything that had happened. "Wherever your path leads from here." Lila nodded once, then turned and walked slowly from the clearing, disappearing into the darkness beyond the gathered crowd, escorted respectfully by 2 warriors assigned to ensure her safe departure from pack territory. Vera remained standing near the edge of the clearing, her own expression carrying visible guilt and uncertainty about her future, standing within the pack, given her role in gathering the forbidden herb used throughout Lila's deception. Corwin approached her gently, his weathered expression carrying more compassion than judgment. "You came forward with concerns before tonight's events, child, even if quietly and indirectly. That counts for something in the Council's eyes. Your punishment will likely be less severe, given your cooperation and clear reluctance throughout this difficult situation." Vera nodded, relief and lingering sorrow mixing across her features as she watched the pack slowly begin returning to their celebration, the dramatic tension of recent weeks finally beginning to dissolve into something resembling normalcy once more. As the clearing gradually filled again with joyful celebration, Cade turned back to Mira, cupping her face gently between his hands, his dark eyes carrying an intensity of emotion he no longer needed to hide or explain away. "It's finally over," he murmured softly. "The truth has been confirmed, before the entire pack, beyond any possibility of doubt." "It has," Mira agreed, leaning into his touch with a sense of peace she had not felt in weeks. "Though I suspect this is really just the beginning of something new, rather than simply an ending to everything that came before." Cade smiled, warm and genuine, leaning down to press a gentle kiss against her forehead, as the pack's celebration swelled joyfully around them beneath the bright, watching moon. 3 weeks passed following the ritual, and the pack lands slowly settled into a new rhythm, one that carried an undercurrent of quiet joy that had been noticeably absent during the difficult weeks of accusation and uncertainty. Mira found herself walking through the village each morning, greeted by warm smiles rather than suspicious glances, the earlier whispers of doubt replaced by genuine respect, and, from many pack members, sincere apologies for their earlier willingness to believe unfounded accusations against her. She had forgiven them easily enough, understanding that fear and uncertainty often clouded judgment even among otherwise kind and reasonable people. What mattered now was the future stretching ahead of her, bright and full of possibility in ways she had never quite allowed herself to imagine before. The pack had organized a formal bonding ceremony to properly celebrate the confirmed mate bond between their alpha and healer, and preparations had been underway for nearly 2 weeks, the entire village buzzing with excitement over the upcoming celebration. Mira stood now in a small preparation room adjacent to the main gathering hall, examining her reflection in a polished silver mirror, while Nora fussed excitedly over the final details of her ceremonial dress. "You look beautiful," Nora said, adjusting a small string of pearls woven carefully through Mira's dark hair. "I still can't quite believe everything that happened. A few months ago, I never would have imagined we'd be standing here today." Mira smiled softly at her reflection, hardly recognizing the confident, radiant woman staring back at her, compared to the frightened accused healer who had stood trembling before the pack council weeks earlier. "Neither could I, honestly, though I suppose that's often how life works. The most unexpected paths sometimes lead to exactly where we're meant to be." A soft knock sounded at the door, and Elder Corwin entered, his weathered face carrying a warm smile as he took in Mira's appearance. "The alpha is growing rather impatient," he said with gentle amusement, "though I suspect a few more minutes of anticipation will only make the moment sweeter when it finally arrives." Mira laughed softly, smoothing the front of her elegant ceremonial dress one final time before nodding toward the door. "I think I'm ready." The main gathering hall had been transformed entirely for the occasion. Strings of soft lantern light woven through the wooden beams overhead, fresh flowers arranged throughout the space, filling the air with delicate, sweet fragrance. The entire pack had gathered for the celebration, filling every available space within the hall, their expressions carrying genuine warmth and excitement as Mira made her way toward the front, where Cade waited for her. He looked breathtaking in his formal ceremonial attire, his dark eyes lighting with unmistakable joy the moment he saw her approaching through the crowd. Mira felt the familiar warmth in her chest swell powerfully as she reached him, taking his offered hand as they turned together to face the assembled pack. Corwin stepped forward to guide the ceremony, his voice carrying the same practiced authority that had guided countless important moments throughout the pack's long history. Tonight, we gather to formally celebrate and honor the true mate bond between our alpha, Cade, and our beloved healer, Mira. A bond confirmed through ancient ritual, undeniable in its truth, and stronger for having weathered the trials that nearly kept these two souls apart. The ceremony continued through traditional vows and blessings, Mira barely aware of the passage of time, as she focused entirely on Cade's steady presence beside her, the warmth between them radiating outward until it seemed to fill the entire hall with something bright and undeniable. Do you, Cade, alpha of this pack, accept Mira as your true and bonded mate, promising to honor, protect, and cherish her for all the days of your life together? Corwin asked, his voice carrying easily across the silent, attentive crowd. I do, Cade said, his voice steady and sure, carrying none of the confusion or hesitation that had once clouded his understanding of true bonding. Without doubt, without reservation, and with a certainty I have never felt about anything else in my entire life. Corwin turned to Mira, his weathered eyes carrying warm encouragement. And do you, Mira, healer of this pack, accept Cade as your true and bonded mate, promising the same honor, protection, and devotion in return? I do, Mira replied, her voice carrying quiet strength, despite the overwhelming emotion swelling within her chest. My wolf recognized this truth before I did, and I am grateful every single day that it never stopped calling me toward exactly where I was always meant to be. The pack erupted into joyful celebration as Corwin pronounced the bond officially and formally recognized, cheers and applause filling the hall as Cade drew Mira into a warm embrace, the lantern light casting a soft, golden glow across the celebration unfolding around them. Later that evening, as the formal ceremony gave way to relaxed feasting and dancing, Mira found herself standing near the edge of the hall, watching the joyful celebration with a sense of peace and contentment she had never quite experienced before. Cade approached quietly, wrapping an arm gently around her waist, as they watched the pack celebrate together. Any regrets? He asked softly, though his tone carried playful confidence rather than genuine worry. Mira leaned into his embrace, smiling up at him with quiet certainty. Not a single one. Though I will admit, the path here was far more complicated than I ever could have imagined. True bonds rarely arrive through simple, easy circumstances, Cade replied thoughtfully. Perhaps that's part of what makes them so precious, once finally discovered and confirmed. Mira nodded, resting her head gently against his shoulder as they continued watching the celebration together. Somewhere in the crowd, Nora danced joyfully with several other young pack members, while Corwin sat comfortably nearby, observing the festivities with quiet, contented satisfaction over having helped guide the pack through such a difficult and complicated situation toward its rightful, joyful conclusion. The false bond that had nearly torn apart an innocent healer's reputation and standing within the pack had ultimately given way to something far more powerful and enduring, a true connection forged not through manipulation or desperate deception, but through genuine, undeniable recognition between two souls always meant to find their way toward each other, regardless of whatever obstacles or lies had temporarily stood in their path. As the moon rose higher above the celebrating pack, casting its familiar silver light across the joyful gathering below, Mira felt the steady warmth in her chest settle into something permanent and unshakable, a quiet promise of everything still waiting to unfold in the many years ahead, built upon a foundation far stronger than any lie could have ever hoped to withstand. Their story, born from accusation and deception, had finally found its true beginning, Exactly where it was always meant to start.